Mikketz, and the title is what? All in the Family. Okay, I'm going to turn this around because we've got some good slides here. I like to see the slides, okay? Can we do that? Yeah, we can do that. All right, the 10th reading from the book of Genesis is called Mikketz, which means the end. The title comes from the first verse of the reading, which says, "Now it happened at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream." The portion begins with Pharaoh's portentous dreams, Joseph's interpretations, and his subsequent rise to power over Egypt. When a famine strikes the land of Canaan, his brothers come to Egypt seeking grain, but they did not recognize Joseph, who engineers a means by which he can test their character. Now, the story of Joseph is a multifaceted tale of hubris, jealousy, hate, betrayal, success, seduction, unjust imprisonment, and finally, redemption. But there's also an underlying story of a man who was wronged by his family and how he reacted to it. Joseph was sold into slavery by his older brothers at the age of 17. His life was like a roller coaster for about 20 years then, just up and down, up and down. Joseph eventually became the second most important man in Egypt. Egypt was the most powerful nation in the world at that time, so that would make Joseph, the former slave and ex-con, the second most powerful and important man in the known world. Just amazing when you come to think of it, that could happen. God's hand was on him. Against that backdrop, we see a drama unfold that could have destroyed a family and the future nation of Israel. When Joseph's brothers came to Egypt a second time to buy grain during this massive famine that engulfed the entire Mediterranean area, they had no idea what they were getting into. They again came face to face with the brother that they had wronged some 20 years earlier. Joseph recognized his brothers, but since he was dressed in the fashion of the Egyptian ruler, they had no idea who he was. Now, I was going to come up here and say, that he walked like an Egyptian, okay? But that would have been funny, all right? So I'm not going to do that. Joseph had arranged to eat a meal with his brothers. Again, this was just out of the ordinary. And this would be the first time that he had seen his baby brother in 20 years. Now, Benjamin was only about 10 years old when Joseph was sold into slavery. So, Benjamin is now 30 years old, okay? That looks like a teenager, but you know how these artists back in the 16 and 1700s were. They were good artists, but they were terrible historians. And I'm not really sure they read the Bible all that carefully. But anyway, we got some pictures here, and Benjamin was 30 years old at this time, okay? And Joseph was 37, just to keep it all in perspective. And we read this already this morning in the Torah portion, so let me go ahead and read it again. When Joseph came home, they brought him the offering in their hand into the house, and they bowed down to the ground to him. Then he asked if they were well, and he said, "Is he well? Your elderly father that you told me about, is he still alive?" "Your servant, our father, is well," they said. "He is alive." Then they knelt and bowed down. Then he lifted his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, "Is this your youngest brother that you mentioned to me?" And they said, May God be gracious to you, my son." Then Joseph hurried out because his compassion grew warm and tender toward his brother, so that he wanted to cry. So he went into an inner room and wept there. So it's very obvious then that Joseph never watched any John Wayne movies. Joseph had manipulated events in order to force his brothers to bring Benjamin with them. Now that he had all his brothers, remember he also, for them to go back that first time, he kept Simon back as a slave, as a hostage. And who knows how many months it was before he came back. And so that finally they came back, he let Simon come in with them. So he had all of his brothers there, all 11 of them. Now that he had all of his brothers there with him, he had the perfect opportunity to throw them all in prison for their evil deeds. Except for Benjamin. All of them were guilty, weren't they? I mean, every one of them were guilty of complicity, if nothing else. Conspiracy to commit whatever, selling somebody into slavery. And yet, there was something far different inside Joseph. Most men would have relished the opportunity for revenge, but Joseph wept. Most men would harbor deep-seated hatred for those who had caused him so much pain, but Joseph wept. There was nothing in Joseph's heart and mind as important as his family. These men had abused him terribly 20 years ago, and Joseph's response was to cry. Joseph knew that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and his own father Jacob had directed his path in order for him to be the agent of salvation for his family. Instead of hate and revenge, Joseph showed nothing but love and forgiveness. Now, Yeshua has been called Mashiach ben Yosef, or the Messiah, son of Joseph. And there are many, many parallels between their lives. If you're in our Torah club, you would know that we went through quite a few of them. There's a list that one guy even came up with 60 things that were a parallel between Joseph and Yeshua. Yeshua lived a sinless life, resisting many temptations. Just kind of like Joseph, he lived a pretty good life, and he resisted some pretty stiff temptations. Yeshua taught us the power and necessity of forgiveness. In Matthew 5:22-24, he says, "But I tell you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be subject to judgment. And whoever says to his brother, Racha, shall be subject to the council. And whoever says, you fool, shall be subject to fiery Gehenna. Therefore, if you are presenting your offering upon the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your offering there before the altar and go. First, be reconciled to your brother, and then come and present your offering." Yeshua is telling us that our offerings, our good deeds, our piety, are not enough, and they're not acceptable if we don't make things right with our brother. Now, brother in this context can mean family, friends, acquaintances in the congregation. It can be just whoever around you that you have offended or they have offended you. You know, I mean, it's easy to do. Our relationship with our neighbors, our fellow man, is important. It's the second most important commandment of God. And sometimes, you know, I can get in trouble just opening my mouth. I remember one time many years ago in congregation we were in, and I was a much, much younger person then, okay? This would have been about 40 years ago. And I used to go around and greet all of what I thought were the old and early dads, people that were, in my mind, above 60. Whoa, did I get that wrong, huh? All of these old people, I would go around and greet them. And now since, I saw 60 a long time ago. But I'd go around and greet all of them, and there's this one little lady, and I had prayed with her husband to receive salvation just a few months before he passed away. And she was a precious little lady, and that they had invited us over to their house for a wonderful non-kosher meal, because it's South Louisiana. Okay, what can I say? And her husband was he was a shrimper, and I walked in their house, and the house is just nothing but deer antlers all over the place. Now this guy's a shrimper. What's he doing with deer antlers? And so I asked him. He said, when I come up, and he had a very thick Cajun accent. I'm not even going to try that. Okay. So anyway, he told me that coming up the bayous when he's offshore shrimping, and he would use a searchlight to navigate up through the bayous. And I had seen that many times watching the shrimpers come in, because I was in the Coast Guard at the time, and I was sitting on the bayou watching for drug smugglers. And so I knew that these guys were doing navigating that way. And so he said, yeah, we could see some great deer out there when you're coming up in the bayou. And he says, so when you see one and you catch them in the spotlight there, they just stop and you can shoot them. I'll drive the boat over there, get the thing and bring it in, put him on ice, down in the hold of the ship, of the shrimper. And I asked him, I said, yeah, but isn't spotlighting at deer at night, isn't that illegal? He just pointed his finger like that, and he said, no, it ain't just legal if you don't got caught. So I always had a soft spot in my heart for a guy like that, and his wife was a sweetheart. And so I was greeting her one night, and I said, look, I missed you the last couple of weeks. I hope you weren't sick or anything like that. And she said, oh, well, yeah, a little bit. I just wasn't feeling all that well. And I said, well, at least it was just you were sick. I thought maybe you were staying home to watch wrestling. And all of her little old lady friends around there just giggled. They thought that was funny. Well, little did I know that I had really, oh boy, did I step in it there. Oh, I upset her terribly, because that I would think that she was home, staying home watching wrestling instead of coming to church. And that just offended her terribly. And I didn't know it until months and months later. And I asked her, I said, how come you never talk to me anymore? She said, because you hurt my feelings. Yeah, aw, and that hurt me. That I was a bit stupid enough to do something like that. So I apologized profusely all over the place to try to be, I didn't just blow it off and said, sensitive old lady, what am I, and walk away. No, I apologize very much so. It's important. Rav Shaul, the Apostle Paul, taught us in Galatians, brothers and sisters, you are called to freedom. Only do not let your freedom become an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For the whole Torah can be summed up in a single saying, love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not destroyed by one another. Again, in a letter to the congregation in Rome, Rav Shaul then gives us some good advice. He says in chapter 12 there, Let love be without hypocrisy, detesting what is evil, holding fast to the good. Be tenderly devoted to one another in brotherly love. Outdo one another in giving honor. Do not be lagging in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Keep serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, enduring in distress, persisting in prayer, contributing to the needs of the Kedoshim, extending hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but associate with the lowly. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Repay no one evil for evil. Give thought to what is good in the eyes of all people. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live in shalom with all people. Now, I like that last verse there, where it says, if possible, so far as it depends on you, live in shalom, live in peace with everyone. Okay? Your relationship with people often depends on you. I realize that some folks are just not easy to get along with. You know? But you're married. You got to stick with it. All right? You have to walk on eggshells when you're around some people. And that's what we're called to do. Okay? Don't get out your old combat boots and go stomping through the eggs. Walk on the eggshells. That is the part of that, if you remember Romans 12:1 about that living sacrifice, calls us all to be a living sacrifice, our lives. Now, with those thoughts in mind, I'm going now to the hard part of this teaching. And, okay, I'm probably going to make somebody mad here today. All right? Now, my intent, and I'm going to be talking about Christmas. Okay? My intent is not to lift it up or tear it down. My intent is to talk about how do we react. Now, both within and without the Messianic movement today are people that have decided that they no longer celebrate Christmas. I get that. The reasons are varied and generally settle on these main points. There's probably more. I know there's many more, but we don't have time to go into all of that. Number one, disagreement on the actual date of Yeshua's birth. The possible dates include Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah, Shavuot, and the first of Nisan. That's the one that I go along with, first of Nisan. Many of you know that. Number two, Christmas it's merged with an older pagan holiday to coincide with the winter solstice. Number three, Christmas trees are falsely maligned as objects of worship as described in Jeremiah 10, or they are sometimes called pagan, sexuality and so forth. We're not going to get into that too much. Santa Claus, number four, has replaced Jesus or Yeshua as the reason for the season. And so there may be other reasons that, that are enumerated, but for our purposes today, we're just going to, look at these. Now, do we really know the real date for the birth of the Messiah? No, we don't. There are many theories and calculations as to when he was born. Does his possible birth on December 25th or during Sukkot or Rosh Hashanah or even the correct assumption on the first of Nisan, does that affect your salvation at all? No. Okay? Nobody should be going like this. You should all be going. It does not affect your salvation. If Yeshua was born on the 4th of July, would any of us be less redeemed and covered by the blood of the Lamb? We'd have a whole lot better fireworks, wouldn't we? Yeah. No, it would not. The date of Yeshua's birth is not a salvation issue. Some point out that Christmas was chosen on December 25th to coincide with the winter solstice, which is celebrated by many non-believers. While that may be true, does that in and of itself make Christmas a pagan holiday? Okay, and I have to agree with that. Sure, I couch all this stuff in terms that you're supposed to agree with. Okay, I would ask you to consider the names that we ascribe to the days of the week. All of the days of the week use names honoring some ancient deity. You don't believe it? Google it when you get home. Don't Google it now, okay? Because that takes you away from what else I'm going to say. Are we pagans because we use those names? No. Only if you really wanted to get away from that, you'd have to start speaking Hebrew all the time, because Hebrew, they only counted like day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, Shabbat. And then day 1, go right there. And Portuguese is another. I've lived in Brazil for for a good bit, and in Portugal and in Brazil, where they speak Portuguese, they count the days 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. But they count Sunday as, they call it Domingo, okay? But they don't count Shabbat as the right day. All right. So anyway, but they do count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So, what about the names of the months? Our calendar is based on a Roman calendar that was established about 753 BCE, give or take a year or two. That's when the first Roman dude came up with his calendar, and they went from 10 months to 12 months, But anyway, 7 of the 12 months of the year are named after Roman gods or Roman emperors that portrayed themselves as gods. All right? So, however, it's not just the Gregorian calendar that reflects false gods. The Hebrew calendar shows blatant compromise as well, based on as a result of their time in Babylon during the exile. So, does being born in one of these months make you a pagan? Obviously not. Many people point to Jeremiah 10 as a prohibition against Christmas trees. Let's look at what it says. Thus says Adonai, do not learn the way of the nations to be frightened by signs of the heavens, though the nations are terrified by them. The customs of the peoples are useless. It is just a tree cut from the forest, the work of the hands of a craftsman with a chisel. They decorate it with silver and gold and fasten it with hammer and nail so it won't totter. Turn over. That does not sound too much like a Christmas tree to me, where they come in and they chop all the limbs off of it. And basically, what? You take these verses literally. You see a person that's cutting down a tree, carving an image into it, and then gilding it with gold or silver. Now, the Asherah poles in ancient Canaan, and possibly the totem poles of the Pacific Northwest, are examples of that. So, and here's one dude. They're the modern Asherah poles. And so here's some dude, I don't know, just so deluded, but he's got his own Asherah poles that he carved, and those are his gods, things that he carved himself. What a dummy! In the words of Bugs Bunny, what am I wrong? Okay. So. No one that I know of worships them at the end of the season. You throw them in the wood pile and you burn them. Or they're disassembled and stuffed in a box or in a container after Christmas and then, stuffed up in the garage, in the attic, or wherever. That's a strange way to treat a God, isn't it? Yeah. One guy told me, says, "Oh yeah, you bow down to that Christmas tree." I said, "Well, we don't, okay, if you had a Christmas tree, yeah, how do you bow down to it?" He says, "You put presents under it, and then you bow down to pull the presents out." And that makes me worshiping a Christmas tree? I bow down to change my tires, too, when they're flat. And I certainly am not worshiping that, The last point I want to make is, and I thoroughly agree with this one. Santa Claus and the whole Santa Claus culture was hijacked. It's totally compromised. It's hijacked what should be a wonderful time of celebrating the birth of our Messiah. Okay? Growing up, Santa Claus was never part of our culture. As a child, my grandparents and all of my dad's older brothers and sisters, because he was the baby of the family, they played the Santa Claus game with him. And so this was back in the, late 20s, early 30s. And so when he finally got up to an age that he realized that there was really no Santa Claus, it hit him very hard. Hit my dad very hard. Because he said, if you lied about Santa Claus to me, then you're lying about Jesus. I'm not going to believe in him either. It was a tough slog for him for many years before he got away from that, being hurt by being lied to. So he would never, ever allow us to believe in Santa Claus, And so that was a very good thing that he did for us. So, what do we do about all of this? What should be our reaction? Nowhere in the Bible is Christmas mentioned. Neither are there any instructions, to tell you the truth, as to how to celebrate Hanukkah or Purim. You light from the left to the right, or right to the left. You put them in from the right to the left, but to the right to the right. I don't know. Find me the verse, because I always get confused which way to light the Hanukkah. There are no verses that I know of. We don't know how to do those. And Purim. We observe Purim by running around in funny costumes and being silly and eating Hamantaschen. Right? Hamantaschen are those little three-cornered cookies that represent Haman's hat, okay? Haman's hat. Haman's got it, all right. And why do we do that? Because the Bible tells us to say, boo. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. It doesn't tell us anything about that. And yet we observe these holidays. Christians who celebrate the birth of the Messiah on 25 December do so out of a desire to honor the Messiah. Do they have it all right? Can we as Jews, Messianic Jews or grafted-in believers say that with certainty that our form of worship is perfect? I would say not. Okay? Joseph, after 20 years in Egypt, had an Egyptian name. His wife was the daughter of an Egyptian priest. He had 2 sons from this pagan wife. Joseph dressed like an Egyptian. He walked like an Egyptian. He talked like an Egyptian. And yet, he was still tied to his Hebrew family. His family was important enough to risk his position to embrace them. Now, what do I mean by that? What did I read before? When they served their meals, he ate by himself at his table. His brothers ate over here with all the brothers at their table. The Egyptian court people that were around Joseph, they ate there because they said it was an abomination to eat with those Hebrew people. Why? Because they were shepherds, and they didn't honor shepherds. Okay, so if he would eat with these despicable Hebrews, he was risking his position as the number 2 man in Egypt. He risked that. How important is your family today? Are you willing to cast them aside because they celebrate Christmas like every other Jesus-loving Christian? I know these are hard questions, and like I said, you're probably going to spit in my food before I eat out there. But how are you ever going to win your family to the true salvation of the Messiah with an arrogant attitude of superiority because we worship on the Sabbath? And I've heard people say that. Don't you think that the Christians are sinning because they're worshiping on Sunday? No. No more than a person that they go to Wednesday night prayer meeting. They got training union on Wednesday night. All sorts of things. Does that make them sinners? No. They're honoring God in their way, in their own way. Should they be worshiping on Shabbat? Yes, sure. There's no question about that. But we should also be able to worship God on any day of the week, and every day of the week, acknowledging Him as our Messiah, as our Savior, every day of the week. Even those days that are named after pagan gods, okay? We don't celebrate Christmas or Easter because of Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. You will never win them over by saying that they're pagans. And I have seen people tell me, well, my families are all pagans because they have a Christmas tree in their house and they celebrate Christmas. Really? No, you're never going to win them by calling them pagans. You win them over by showing your love for them. Remember that time when Jesus said He came to bring a sword that would divide families? Well, He wasn't talking about going to war during Christmas, all right? Outside of your relationship with Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah, there is no relationship more important than your own family. Please don't ostracize your loved ones because they don't believe like you do. Now, within the Messianic, here, even in this congregation, I got to look at my notes there and see that, I said it. Even within this congregation, we have both ends of the spectrum. There are families that came out of a particular denomination. And because they said that denomination just had some theology that was wonky, and they just couldn't go with it anymore. So they worship with us. And yet they still retain a loving, caring relationship with the congregation that they left. Now, how do I know that? Because I've been to their house and have been to their parties and met their former congregants. All right? And so you're never going to win those former congregants over by calling them ugly names. It's just not going to happen. Do they have different beliefs? Absolutely they do. But yet they showed love to each other. I've heard people say, I would not go into this house or with my family because they're Catholic. And that's the word they use. Okay, so I'm not denigrating any religion. That's what I hear. They're Catholic, and they have their Virgin Mary and their saints and stuff like that. And I said, so calling them pagans is going to win them? No. Sadly, we have some folks who are so dogmatic about what they now believe, they cannot show love and tolerance to their own family members, refusing to gather with them during this Christmas season, refusing to have anything to do with their loved ones, with all my heart. And it breaks my heart that I have to do this every year or two. I'm asking you, try to fit, if you fit into this description, please reconsider what you're doing. God gave us our families for a reason. You may be the only one that can bring salvation to that household. Think about it that way. You may be the agent for their salvation, like Joseph was the agent for salvation for his family. I think Paul had it right in 1 Corinthians 9:22. He says, to the weak I became weak, so that I might win over the weak. I have become all things to all men, so that by all means possible I might save some. Now, our objective is not to show off our, in quotes, superior style of worship, okay? You catch my sarcasm there, all right? Our major purpose is to win the lost at any cost. So in this dual season of Hanukkah and Christmas, may the light of Messiah shine through each of us. Please consider these things and be more loving, and if this hits some of you, and you get mad at me, well, I'm sorry. But it's something that weighs on my heart a lot when I see people that just throw away their family when they could be kind and loving to their family. Yeshua did not, when in his life, what did he ate? He went out and ate with the sinners and the publicans, and they called him a drunk because he would go out and eat dinner with people that were undesirable, pagans sometimes, or even worse, tax collectors. And yet, that's what he did. He said, it's the sick that need the doctors. If people don't worship properly, or they're not doing these things, you have to love them in the kingdom. I never reacted very well by being shouted at by some preacher that would stand up and spit to the third row, and just that didn't work very well for me. I bowed up like an old bullfrog, and that kind of thing. And maybe a lot of people do. I respond much better to someone that's going to be nice to me and make my steaks medium rare, okay? So let's let the light of the Messiah show through us. And again, I'm not trying to build Christmas up or cut it down. I'm just saying, let's respond to our families. Don't lose your families over this. It's very, very important that you love them, bless them, and then who knows what the Holy Spirit will speak to them and bring them into the fold. Many of them are lost. You want to be the agent for their salvation. Could we stand, please? Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, we thank you, Lord, that you've given us the example of Joseph. You've given us the example of Yeshua, an example of love for our families. Do we agree with everything? No, Lord, we don't. But it's family.